Hello, and welcome to the very first Knights in the Classroom question and answer video. I'm Sir Matthew.
And I'm Lady Andrea.
Today we'll be answering the questions that were brought to us by Miss Delpippo's class at Good Shepherd Catholic School. They generated these questions by watching our recent historical martial arts video here on our YouTube channel. Our first question is, how many years of training were required in order to become a knight? Well, typically a knight would start off in the medieval period at the age of 7 by becoming a page. During that time, at that age, they would learn how to horseback ride, learn proper manners to live in court, as they called it, as well as how to dance. Yes, dance was a big part of a knight's life. Around the age of 14, they would become a squire, and at that point, they would do pretty much whatever their lord and master told them to do, but a big part of that would be their training. They would also assist the knight to go into battle and assist them there, possibly with very little armor on. Then around the age of 21, they would hope for themselves to be knighted, and then their journey as a knight truly begins. But they would be training their entire lives.
So the next question is, have you ever had to fight in a real battle against bad guys? What does it feel like to be in a battle? And the answer is no. I've never had to be in a real life battle against bad guys. I would think that the best person to ask would be someone who is in the military, who has had active duty, and they might give you a sense of what it's really like. I have not had to do that for real life.
Our next question is, have you ever gotten hurt while training? Well, the simple answer is yes. Knights in the Classroom has been around for about 10 years. In our first 5 years, we did stage combat, which is kind of like what you see in professional wrestling or in film and television. So we rehearsed as much as we could, but couldn't probably rehearse as much as we should have, and because of that, occasionally we got hurt. My worst injury there would have been a concussion, unfortunately, which is pretty awful. I don't recommend it at all. About 5 years ago, we started doing historical martial arts, like you saw in the video, which is based on the teachings of an ancient manuscript. And with that, plus the armor, we're actually more protected than we were when we were doing stage combat. In that, still accidents happen, and I have been hit on the finger. I lost a fingernail, as a matter of fact, and in the video you guys watched, I actually got hit on the hand at one point, and it actually busted open just above my knuckle here. So go back and watch the video and see if you can see when I get hit. It actually didn't notice it until after the fact that I had been hurt a little bit. I felt a little something, but no big deal, especially compared to what they would have been back in ancient times.
So the next question is, how long do you need to train to use weapons? Well, Sir Matthew and I train about 6 days a week. We do everything from strength training to yoga to stay very flexible. We also do, we work with spears and swords. We are also modern fencers as well. I've been doing it for about 2 years, and Sir Matthew's been training for about 10 years.
So our next question is, how much armor do you wear? Is the armor heavy? What is it made from? So in the video, you saw me wearing what's known as my new harness. It's based on the Cherbourg 13 harness itself from Cherbourg Castle in Germany. And it covers me from head to toe. It's custom made for me, which is the very first custom armor I've had made. It's a misnomer to think that when someone was knighted during the medieval period, they're just handed a whole bunch of armor. You would go through different stages. And like that, I went through different stages. I've had several different kits or harness of armor itself. This is the first custom one. It covers me head to toe, and it is about 88 pounds, which, yes, that's very, very heavy, and it is made from steel. Throughout history, armor wasn't always made from steel. It used to be made from bronze or even iron, and over time things got lighter as metallurgy advanced, as science advanced, and steel is the best of the best when it comes to the medieval history itself, and yeah, it's quite heavy. But through training, I can wear it quite comfortably now.
Is it hard to fight with chainmail on? Yes, because it's heavy. But as with anything you do, if you keep working at it and you get stronger, over time that task becomes easier.
Is it hard to fight with your helmet on? Is it hard to see through the helmet? How much does the helmet weigh? This helmet, which is my current helmet, weighs 13 pounds. Some of my other helmets up behind me are actually heavier, some as much as 16 pounds. That takes a bit to get used to. It's like taking a very fat cat and having it on top of your head. Not that that's realistic. But you get used to it over time, like anything else with all the armor. Seeing through this one is actually the best helmet of all the ones I've ever had. If you take your fingers and do this, you can see how you're limited in your vision. Sometimes you can't see down very well, sometimes you lose your peripheral vision. This one is fantastic. I can see through all of these holes as well as down here. So the vision in this helmet is the best I've had of any other helmet going. This question has got us inspired, as a matter of fact, and we're going to create another video where you're going to get a chance to see through all of our helmets. Look for that in the coming weeks.
So someone's wondering, how long does it take to finish fixing it? In terms of taking care of armor, it is actually a lot of work because we have to make sure that all this metal doesn't rust. So there's always polishing involved, there's waxing involved, there's maintaining little things that break. In fact, we have a whole separate video on how to take care of chainmail, so if you'd like to check that out.
What was the strongest armor that gave the most protection? Plate mail, the stuff that I was wearing in the video. My full plate mail is by far the strongest. Before that we had chain mail and then leather mail. Leather doesn't hold up as well as metal does to slashes and stabs. Chain mail was great for slashes, not great for arrows or direct spear strikes and things like that, but plate mail was the very best protection you had, and of course they were inspired by Mother Nature. You look at different animals in the animal kingdom, things like lobsters and crabs and armadillos, and that's where they were inspired to continually evolve the armor based on the evolution of weapons.
What is the best food for a knight to eat to keep you strong during battle? Well, this is not really an exciting answer, it's just what you learn in health class. You should be eating vegetables, fruits, proteins, complex carbohydrates. Basically, you want to eat like an Olympic athlete to keep all of your muscles strong and to keep you going in battle.
What would you rather use, a crossbow or a sword? Well, the crossbow there behind me, this is a sword. I'd like to have both if I could. It comes down to circumstance. If I'm in a one-on-one battle and I can defeat my opponent from a distance, I would love to have a crossbow. It would, in often cases, go through the plate mail like mine, so it's a very deadly weapon, but a crossbow can misfire, whereas a sword doesn't need to be reloaded. So it really comes down to the circumstances, but if I absolutely had to pick one, I'd be picking a sword.
What is it like to live in a castle? Well, we haven't had the opportunity to actually live in a castle. We have been lucky enough to get to stay in a castle in France and one in Wales. But especially during the medieval time, it would have been tough. They had no indoor water, they had no indoor heating, there had to be a fireplace in a room for you to be warm. They hung tapestry on walls, not just because they looked pretty, but because they were actually trying to trap the heat in so that you could stay warm. And I think it would have been pretty rough to live in a real castle.
What do knights fight for? They can fight for a wide variety of things. Typically a knight is given land to build a fortress in exchange for coming to the aid of their lord or king whenever they're called. So typically a knight would fight for whatever he's told to fight for. That's part of the deal of him being a knight and being a sworn lord of a particular king or kingdom. It all depends on the circumstances, but they can fight for a wide variety of things. If you think of the medieval period kind of like the board game Monopoly mixed with the board game Risk, you get kind of an idea what it's like. Owning land was hugely important, but typically a knight would fight for whatever he is told to fight for, much like today's police or military.
Next, someone's wondering, do you have a horse? And what is its name? Do you put any armor on your horses to protect them? No, we don't have a horse. But in medieval times, horses that went into battle would have had armor on them if the knight was wealthy enough to afford getting armor for their horse. And it would be done much the same way as for a man, where everything would be measured and the blacksmith would make that armor especially for that horse to keep him safe.
What is the best weapon to use? Well, I can give you all sorts of answers here, but in reality, what it comes down to is what is the best weapon for you, and that is based on your training. So For me, my best weapon to use would be a sword, because I've spent the most of my time training with swords, whether it be an arming sword or a long sword. So for me, the best weapon to use would be a sword, but in most cases, in a big melee or a huge battlefield, you'll use whatever weapon you have available. If your sword breaks or gets taken from you, you'll pick up whatever you find and you'll use it to the best of your abilities. So it really comes down to the best weapon being the one that's available and the one that you've had the most training with.
Where would you get the materials to make the weapons? We don't actually make our own weapons. We have them custom made, and they come from all over the world. We do make most of our own shields, like this Scottish targe. And just like we made a whole class set of our Roman shields for the Roman Shield Formations activity, and there's a whole separate video on how we made those too.
What would they earn from being a knight? What was medieval money called? Well, medieval money might be called a number of different things. I can tell you they didn't have paper money. They would have had mostly coins. But a knight wouldn't be paid like a traditional person gets a salary today, like your mom and dad or family members, police officers. You don't get a normal salary back then. They might get paid for tournaments. They might win things in tournaments. But generally it was more along the lines of you're given this land, you can live on this land, and it was a very different situation. Money evolved from a situation of needing to barter things. So traditionally you'd start off by saying, okay, I've got a whole bunch of wheat and another person has fish, so we would trade them. But once it became a situation where one person didn't need what the other person had, they needed currency to be able to trade things. And it came down to weight, different types of metal itself, and the coins were weighed a certain amount of things, and then you'd get a certain amount of money for the fish that you wanted to trade in, and so would the person who had the wheat, and then they'd have the money to go and then buy whatever they needed, regardless to what the other person's needs were. So that's how currency evolved, and we do have some reproduction coins, which we'll show you right now.
Well, Sir Matthew and I like to go on historic field trips around the world, and we often find some really interesting things. Here we have some replicas of coins. This one is from the late 1500s, from Queen Elizabeth I of England. We found this at the Tower of London, which was an ancient castle. This one is from her father, King Henry VIII. And this one here in the middle is from Bath, England. Bath was a Roman settlement, and this coin could be almost 2,000 years old. Next, someone wondered, how does a battle start? Well, you guys know how this goes, right? If your words aren't working, people start fighting. So in ancient times, as today, humans fought for any number of reasons. Sometimes money, sometimes power, land, maybe someone's insulted someone, maybe someone's willing to fight because someone was terribly wronged, and that would be a reason for going to battle.
What was the most common job in the medieval period? Well, likely it was to be a farmer, because you needed a lot of people farming the land to provide food for everybody. So most likely the most common job was a farmer.
Someone wanted to know, are dragons real? Does this guy count? Actually, we don't have any evidence, any scientific evidence that dragons were real. We think, scientists think, actually, that it's possible, despite the fact that there are a number of different cultures throughout ancient history that have the myth of the dragon. We're thinking that scientifically it's probably the case that ancient people started to find dinosaur bones and they weren't really sure how they linked up. So they might have found a dinosaur that had some wings, they might have found a dinosaur like a T-Rex or a velociraptor, and somehow maybe they thought that they went together, but it's a little bit like doing a puzzle without having the picture there. So there's no scientific evidence that dragons really existed.
And it's time for our final question. Was there ever a period of cannibalism in medieval history? Well, during the medieval period, we don't have a lot of written record because it's part of the reason why they call it the Dark Ages. When the Romans left, most of the literacy went with them, so people didn't write a lot of stuff down. So a lot of the history we have of that time period is very vague, especially about the lifestyles of every person or peasants and whatnot. So with that in mind, we really don't know if any specific cases of cannibalism were ever recorded, but throughout all of ancient history, cannibalism is quite prevalent, even as far back as the first kingdom in ancient Egypt. They believed strongly in cannibalism. It was a regular activity. What would happen is your family member would pass away, like your grandmother, and to pay tribute to them and their life, you would actually eat their flesh. And gives a whole new meaning to, let's eat, Grandma.